Hi, folks. Welcome to the first edition of Government Matters for the year 2021. My name is Mike Dobbs. I'm managing editor for Reminder Publishing, and it's my pleasure and privilege to be talking to State Senator Eric Lesser today. Thank you for joining us, Senator.
Thanks for having me, Mike. We are in person together.
I know.
No Zoom.
If you're not aware, Senator Lesser has a new nickname. It's King of Zoom, because he's been very diligent every week doing a Zoom interview discussion with someone who is of matter, who matters, someone who has got some good information to share with the public. And I congratulate you on just how many of these that you've done in order to keep information flowing to your constituents.
Thank you, Mike. No, I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun doing it, and it's just fun to be back here.
Well, we have a full piece of paper here with all sorts of things, because there are so many things going on affecting Massachusetts besides the, let's say, hopeful end of the pandemic.
Yes.
We're very hopeful about that. So these are not in any particular order of importance, but because MGM is just behind that wall, let's go with talking about sports betting first. The legislature is considering, and correct me if I'm wrong, several different sports betting proposals. Could you just give us an update of where this legislation now stands?
Yeah, so just to kind of back up for people, sports betting, of course, was not legal in any state just 3-4 years ago. In any state, of course, except Nevada and Las Vegas, which had an exception, and Delaware had a little bit of an exception for some limited sports betting there. But there was a federal law called PASPA, which had, to make a long story short, the law was challenged by New Jersey, and it actually went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court invalidated that federal law. New Jersey, because they were the plaintiff in that case, was ready to go, so they became the first new state, so to speak, to legalize sports betting. This was about 3 years ago. Since then, you now have more than 30 states that have in some way legalized sports betting. Now, there's a lot of variation there between what they do, the scope of what they do, but locally, or like in our neck of the woods here in New England, Rhode Island has legal sports betting. New Hampshire has legal sports betting. New Jersey, I mentioned, has legal sports betting. New York has brick and mortar sports betting, but not yet online. And Connecticut also does not have it yet, but is getting close. So, I personally feel like we've learned a lot over the last 3 years. We know what kind of works. We know what doesn't. I think it's time to legalize in a sort of limited way for now sports betting, both online for people to use. Companies like DraftKings, FanDuel, there's a lot of them. Those are probably the best known ones. But then also, obviously, to be able to do it in person. So MGM would be a place people could go and do that. So where we're at is, you've got a lot of different proposals on the table, and there's a lot to sort out in terms of how you scope it, how you set it up, what the tax rate is, how you ensure it's done safely. And there's going to be a process that the legislature is going to go through on that. But there's a lot of live proposals, and there's a lot of ideas moving back and forth about how to make it happen.
Do you anticipate that this is something that could be done within this legislative session?
Well, in theory, it could be done very quickly in the sense that we now really know, I think, what we need to know about doing it in a safe and responsible way. We have the data, and we have the now 2+ years, 3 years really, of experience in New Jersey. We have the experience in Rhode Island. We have the experience in New Hampshire, and we've learned, so just as an example, Rhode Island lost money when the Patriots won the Super Bowl because they organized their sports book through their state lottery. They didn't properly manage the risk. So obviously in Rhode Island, most people are betting on the Patriots. When the Patriots actually won, the state owed all that money back, and they actually ended up losing money. So we've learned, for example, that's probably not the best way to set set something up. New Jersey, they've had a very robust market there for the last several years. There's been generally good feedback about how New Jersey has worked. New Hampshire set up a different system where they have an exclusive operator, DraftKings, working under contract through the state. So we've learned a lot, and we're seeing what's working and what doesn't work. Absolutely, I think we could see a bill by the end of the year, but the timeline really is more of a political timeline in the sense of how you get the various legislators kind of lined up behind a common idea. And I'd also point out that there's plenty of people that are not fans of gambling and have a lot of reluctance about this issue in the first place. So there's work to do there.
So, needless to say, anything that the legislature delivers to Governor Baker for final approval has to hold the state lottery harmless out of this. Have to protect the state lottery system, I would imagine.
Well, yeah. So there's a couple things to unpack with that. I mean, one is the lottery the operator of the sports book? Some states have done that, like Rhode Island actually has their lottery operating it. That's one kind of set of questions. But another concern will legalizing sports betting and or creating an online sports betting product when you're not giving the lottery that same ability to offer an online product, does that kind of rob Peter to pay Paul in the sense that you're going to dilute lottery sales in exchange for sports betting? I'd point out that was a similar argument to brick and mortar casinos, which didn't really pan out. Lottery sales have actually gone up, even as we've had brick and mortar casinos come online. So that's part of the debate and part of the analysis. But again, at this point, we're not pulling things out of thin air. We have other states to look at, and other states that have had sports betting operating side by side lotteries to see how it works. I mean, one thing I would say is, I do think probably eventually a digital lottery is going to have to be in the future. I mean, we've seen through COVID-19 that everything in life is digital now. We have digital currencies. We have all kinds of. So the idea, I think, that you would have a product that's just completely cash, completely paper, completely in person. For people my age and younger, that's just not how we live our lives. So my sense is that you might see changes on that too in the future.
What are the differences in these various bills when it comes to, are we talking about just professional sports? Are we talking about professional sports and then collegiate sports?
Right.
Little league games, bowling tournaments? I mean,
Well,
where does this stop?
Well, this is an important question, and this is part of an example of what the legislature has to kind of work its way through. So, the plans run the gamut from, more restrictive. My bill and Governor Baker's bill, we actually agree on this, is only professional sports. Feel strongly that the pro teams have a lot of infrastructure to make this work. The players are paid a lot. The players are part of unions that have collective bargaining agreements that give them a lot of protections. The teams themselves are asking for it as a way to provide another experience for their customers or their fans, and so to me, pro sports makes sense, but. Then the next level of that is, well, what about college? What about March Madness? One of the biggest betting markets in the country, in the world. What about the bowl games for football? Those maybe make sense, maybe they don't. And then, where do you draw the line? Can people bet on high school? Can people bet on Little League? I personally don't think they should be allowing that. And then another question is how broadly beyond kind of the core sports market do you limit it? Certain states are now allowing betting on esports or on video game competitions. So there's a lot. You're making me
feel very, very old at this point, Senator.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. Or the Olympics. Should you be able to bet on the Olympics? So there's a lot to unpack.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how the legislature handles this, and then whether or not it meets Governor Baker's expectations. So this is, to me, it's one of the.
Well, he has a voice in it. Yeah, I mean, he would be able to, in theory, veto elements of it or veto the whole package if he doesn't agree with it. We, of course, could override that veto. His gaming commission, in which he makes the appointments, appoints the chair, would have to implement it. So this is going to have to be a partnership between the executive branch and the legislative branch.
Well, let's take a look here at some other questions here in the lightning round. How optimistic are you, looking at what President Biden is doing about infrastructure, that this might be a missing element to convincing people in this state that we need expanded rail? Because obviously, President Biden's infrastructure bill includes money for rail expansion, rail modernization. and I know that you're very much aware of the recent report that the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission had ordered from an outside source that took a look at ridership numbers, projections of revenue, and also estimates of cost, which differed a great deal from MassDOT.
Yes.
So are you...
Interesting, right? Somehow our friends in Connecticut, just to the south of us, were able to factor in an economic impact analysis, which, by the way, concluded that up to $50 billion in economic benefits could come from investing in the inland route from Boston to Springfield and then down to Hartford and New Haven. Somehow our own MassDOT, after 2 years and more than $1 million spent on a study, couldn't figure out how to include a section on economic impact. I think it raises some questions about about how focused they are on really making this happen.
It was very impressive to me to go through that report for the story I wrote, because what it does, it's just not east-west. We're connecting New Haven to Boston.
Right.
We're connecting
Hartford to New York.
Exactly.
Or Hartford to Boston.
We're looking at a rail system that would be radically enlarged from what we presently have, and it would connect more metro areas than we presently have. And that was very impressive to me, because it sort of diffuses part of this argument that Pittsfield to Boston isn't enough to get this job done. In a way, it was never Pittsfield to Boston.
Right.
It's always been this, but this report shows this in no uncertain terms.
It's about connecting Western New England to Eastern New England. It's about connecting New England to New York. The other thing that's worth pointing out is, the Boston-New York air route. Obviously, during COVID, demand was down everywhere, but it's already surging back. The Boston-New York City air route is completely clogged. I mean, anybody who's tried to take the shuttle from, Logan Airport to LaGuardia or JFK or Newark understands that they just can't add more capacity there, really. And the rail route, the Acela route from Boston to New York City, is also at capacity. Anybody who's ever tried to take the train from Boston to New York knows it's really expensive. They already have a lot of trains going back and forth. They can't add more. There's also a lot of vulnerability there with climate change, because if people who have taken that route know, it hugs the Connecticut coast during a large portion of it, and you can literally kind of see the Long Island Sound. It's a beautiful ride for that reason, but it also makes the tracks very susceptible to flooding and to coastal storm surges. So those routes are at capacity. So the promise of this is also that it connects an inland route between Boston and New York City. So not only are you connecting Springfield to Boston, not only are you connecting Worcester to New York City by rail, which right now it isn't. Not only are you connecting Hartford to Boston by rail, which right now it isn't. You're essentially doubling the capacity of transit from Boston to New York City and vice versa. And by the way, that'll take people out of the planes, which helps reduce carbon emissions. It will take people out of their cars, which helps reduce congestion and also reduces carbon emissions. And it's going to bring tens of thousands of people through Springfield, because the interchange will be in Springfield for both east-west traffic going to Boston and north-south traffic going to Hartford, New Haven, and New York City. It would be transformational. I mean, if this happens, you could see a future. I mean, steps from where we are at Union Station in downtown Springfield, you could see a future where you have a dozen or more trains going north-south every day in and out of Springfield, connecting to points north, Northampton, Holyoke, Greenfield, Vermont, on to Montreal, points south, New Haven, Hartford, New York City, and at least a dozen, maybe more, trains going east-west from Pittsfield to Boston. That's 24, 25, 26 trains plus the Amtrak service you already have. You're talking about 30 trains a day coming in and out of Springfield's Union Station. Think about what that does for the vibrancy of the region. Think about the people coming in and out, the businesses it creates. Think about what it does for housing. Think about what it does for new job development. It would transform everything about our region. And that's why the Council of Governments in Hartford is so enthusiastic about this, and that's why they estimated a $50 billion economic impact. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the climate benefits. It would take tens of thousands of cars off the road, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're sitting in the asthma capital of the country, as defined by the National Asthma and Allergy Association. What's the cost of that? In the hospital admissions, in the chronic health issues, rail helps all of these issues. So, it's troubling, frankly, that we don't see the governor focused on this more or engaged on it more.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think, besides this issue, there are other issues that are going to come to the surface as we move out of the pandemic? Because so much of the last year has been focused on trying to address the pandemic, and I understand that. It's an immensely serious event in American history, world history.
It is, yeah.
But at the same time, I think there have been some issues that have been deliberately sort of like put on the back burner. Do you think that obviously East-West Rail has got to be one of these that goes to the top? Obviously sports betting has got to be one of these that come to the top. Right now, are there other issues that you're either working on or you're seeing in the Senate that are about to rise up in terms of prominence for both the legislators and the public?
Well, let me zoom out for a second, and then we'll go zoom in, because I think that they're all they're all interrelated. But I think we've really been facing 4 concurrent crises over the last year. Obviously, COVID-19 was the most urgent in the sense that it had to be confronted immediately because we were dealing with a deadly virus. The second and very urgent one, and one that has been with our country from the start, is a racial crisis, and the growth in racial disparities in our country. They've become exacerbated. Racial injustice in our country, in our state, in our communities here in Western Mass is something that's got to be addressed. And then the third, I would say, is a climate crisis that, of course, we had before COVID, but COVID exposed even more because we saw the interrelationship between air pollution and asthma and comorbidity with COVID, between environmental degradation and it's contributing to pandemic intensity. So, and there's a lot of growing research, by the way, that because of climate change, you're going to see animal habitats getting closer and closer to human populations, which increases the likelihood of a virus jumping from an animal or to a human and spreading another pandemic. So these things are all related. And then the final element, and these are in no particular order, is an economic crisis. COVID exposed that we don't have a worker safety net in this country, that we have a lot of people who were working jobs that as soon as they had to close or as soon as demand stopped, we're left without basic protections, without unemployment insurance, without a safety net, the gig economy workers, for example. So all of that is still here. And even when the virus is gone, we really have our work cut out for us on all of those issues. Another item I would add to that in Massachusetts is we have a severe housing crisis in this state. And housing prices were skyrocketing before COVID. And, my jaw drops looking at the price increases since COVID. Some of that was driven by low interest rates. Some of it was driven by a desire for people to get to homes where there was more space. But the price increases have been double-digit across the board. The median single-family home price in Massachusetts is now over $700,000. I don't know how, I look at the prices in Eastern Mass, I don't know how anybody raises a family there. I don't know how anybody can afford the rents, can afford the mortgage payments. And so we need to build more housing. We need to support more housing growth. We need more transit-oriented development where we have denser development closer to transit that can promote can promote more density. And we also need more housing supports for people, and that's statewide. And by the way, We can do it in a way that creates jobs. You create construction jobs building the housing, you create jobs maintaining the housing and investing in the housing, and you can do it in a way that's environmentally sustainable because, just as an example, in the economic development bill that we did in January, we included historic transit-oriented development incentives to help cluster growth around transit. Just take the train, for not to bring it all back to trains, but take the train project, for example. If you had statewide rail service from Springfield, or from Boston to Framingham to Worcester to Palmer to Springfield to Pittsfield, within 4, 5, 6 mile radius all around each of those stops, you could develop hundreds and thousands of new housing units. The Hartford study, the Council on Government study, talked about this, how many thousands of units already exist within an easy walk or an easy short drive from the transit. So this grows our economy. This creates jobs. You're solving a lot of problems all at once with that kind of an investment.
Are you concerned at all, considering at the way housing prices are going up, of a bubble bursting, and then we have the economic fallout from that, which we have experienced previously, not too long ago? When my wife and I have been talking about maybe we should sell our home and downsize, and I was talking to a gentleman who's in real estate development, and he says, well, don't buy another house. Rent for a few years, wait till the bubble bursts, and then the prices are going to be more reasonable. But the idea of having another bubble bursting and how it affects the economy is rather frightening to me, frankly.
I am concerned about that. I mean, there are a lot of differences between the economy right now, obviously, and the economy in 2005, 2006, 2007, as the housing bubble built up. You don't have the same, you don't have the same credit default swaps and mortgage-backed derivatives and all these financial instruments that you had in the lead up to that crisis. But the basic idea is very concerning. I mean, you have a very low interest rate environment. Borrowing is as easy as it's really been in a very long time. And there's some warning signs, like the idea that people are waiving inspections, that people are offering 20, 25, 30% above the asking price, that they're, that now some banks are not even issuing mortgages because the prices aren't tied to any real assessed value. I mean, there's warning signs there when you start to see that kind of behavior take hold in housing sales. So I am concerned about it, and I think that look, the pricing just isn't sustainable, and there's no reason for it, because if we can build the housing that people need, we're blessed in Massachusetts that people want to live here. We have incredible assets. We've got an incredible economy. If we got the cost issues right, the sky is the limit for us. The limiting factor for people living in Massachusetts is they can't afford to live here because it's so expensive. If we made it more affordable for people, you'd have more young families. You'd have a lot more growth, and the economy overall would benefit.
Something that just happened, which people are now paying attention to, is of course the hacking of the gasoline pipeline. We are seeing some remarkably frightening behavior from the public in light of this sort of temporary slowdown of gasoline flows from the pipeline. I know your interest in cybersecurity. How worried should we be about an entity literally attacking an electrical utility, a gas utility, a private enterprise like this Columbia Pipeline? How worried should we be, and do you think on a state level we're doing enough to try to address this?
The answer is no, we're not doing enough. We're doing nowhere near enough at the moment. Cybersecurity is something that is very concerning, and I think that the state's infrastructure has frankly lagged behind. I mean, you see what's happened with attempts on the election. A significant cell was taken out by cyber attack. that they had said was planning to disrupt the 2020 elections. You saw it. You see obviously what's happening with the gas pipeline. You've seen these attacks on banks, on town governments, on healthcare systems, privacy breaches at credit card companies. This is only going to get worse and worse. And I think what COVID showed is just how much of our life is online. How many people are banking online? How many people are paying their bills online? Telehealth, how many people are doing healthcare online, educational services, and also how much cloud computing has created a scenario where not only are people on their computers and conducting their work through their computers, but their data is all being stored external to that in cloud servers that we just trust are being kept secured,
Right.
and so no, I think this is going to require a Marshall Plan effort in the sense that the new frontier of warfare, the new frontier of terrorism, is going to be cyber, and you've seen this, not to get too far afield with all this, but you've seen this with like the cyber attacks on the Iranian nuclear facilities. Ransomware attacks are now becoming almost commonplace for many municipalities and many local governments in the U.S. So this is going to be a major focus, and has to be a major focus on getting defenses built up.
What do you think that the legislature should be doing then in order to address this? I mean, are there bills that would strengthen our abilities in Massachusetts pending, or has Governor Baker made this?
Well, we did do an IT bond infrastructure bill, and we've given the Baker administration significant tools to issue, bonding. We've given bonding authorization to issue, really significant ways to improve the state's IT infrastructure. I mean, look, the legislature are not subject matter experts on this. Part of this is an education has to happen. Legislators have to learn a lot more through the committee process and other ways about the scope of the issue, but we've got to start making it a priority, both through policy making and through resource allocation. The governor did appoint a new create a new secretariat, a cabinet level official for information technology. Cybersecurity is part of that portfolio, but there needs to be a lot more done.
Okay, speaking about online, and you're absolutely right. If nothing else, COVID and the pandemic showed us if we can't do things in person, we do things online. And that means that we have to have an infrastructure for broadband that's essentially universal. I mean, many school districts face not only trying to get laptop computers to students, but also to make sure that the students had access to high-speed internet. In many cases, they did not, whether it was because their family couldn't afford broadband or because they were living in a community where broadband was limited. So again, here's another issue that, as you pointed out, that COVID has really made us take a look at. I know that the Deval-Patrick administration was trying to make universal broadband a real issue. I know that President Biden has been talking about this in his infrastructure bill. What's the status of that right now on Beacon Hill?
So, there's one of the kind of buckets of projects that the federal aid money can be used for is broadband and broadband improvements. The Baker administration has continued to update us on the progress through the Mass Tech Collaborative of connecting the remaining communities in Western Mass that don't have broadband, getting them up and running. But I think what the pandemic really exposed is this issue is actually multifaceted. You have a very obvious and urgent and inexcusable situation, which is communities in Western Mass that are not connected to broadband at all. That is obviously unacceptable, and frankly, it's an embarrassment for our state that it's taken as long as it has to get those communities connected. There's another issue, which is even communities that are connected, take Springfield, where we are right now, which has great internet service on paper. That internet service is not always equitable. It's often very expensive. The connections can often be unstable, and is often inaccessible for a lot of communities, especially low-income communities, communities of color, immigrant communities that might not have the same access. And what the pandemic really exposed is you might have had a broadband plan that was fine, when you were basically at your house to sleep. Maybe you went home, had quick dinner, watch TV for a little bit, watch Netflix for a little bit, went to bed. But once people were working from home, then they had kids doing school from home. You had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in a house all simultaneously connected. The connections were not reliable or stable at that point. Another piece of this challenge is, hardware gaps. So the Springfield schools, for example, literally sent Chromebooks to every student in order to try to, to try to address the inequality. I think one kid has a brand new MacBook, and another kid doesn't even have a smartphone. So this has got to be addressed from all of those angles, and we need to start thinking about internet access the same way we think about water and sewer and electricity, right? We make water and sewer access, fairly inexpensive and reliable because we appreciate that it's essential to a healthy life in America. And I think increasingly we've seen that internet and broadband needs to be viewed through the same prism.
Well, I know, we can't have necessarily competing electrical systems, although with the advent of home solar, in a way, you do.
Right, exactly.
And some communities, like Westfield and Chicopee, for instance, are developing municipal broadband, which gives residents a consumer issue that they can decide which is the better for them, which is more affordable. Would you like to see more of that happening, more municipal broadband, so therefore people have more of a choice, and maybe it would actually drive some of the prices down?
Yeah, I would love to see an expansion of more municipal broadband and kind of public broadband as a way to compete side by side. Let the private sector, so to speak, show. And by the way, it's not they're quasi-governmental agencies to begin with, because it's not like people have an open choice of dozens of different internet service providers to choose from. It's based off of a public infrastructure that the taxpayer supports and pays for. So, pushing back on the idea that these are, purely private companies, right, only spending their own money, they're utilizing public resources. But no, absolutely. I mean, the Crossroads project in Chicopee, which I'm fairly familiar with, very exciting project, and it has brought costs down, and it is high quality service. So I would love to see that expanded and see more opportunities. The other thing I would just say is we've got to also keep an eye on making sure that we're staying on the front end of the technology investment. So that means, we want to see the 5G implementation. We want to see the high speed, that there's very important economic development and competitiveness elements to that. So it's both. We need to continue to invest in this infrastructure and see the speeds go up, see the 5G implementation. At the same time, we're providing that access across the board to people. Frankly, I think if you asked a lot of families, would you rather go 24 hours without water in the house, or 24 hours without internet access? I don't know. You can use bottled water for a day.
Right,
I'm not sure.
Take a shower.
Yeah,
yes, but
yeah.
You need the internet.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially if they're working from home, I think a lot of people would say, I need the internet.
Well, I want to end this out with something that in a way that we started with. We started talking about COVID, and I want to end this out with the vaccine rollout. The news just came out recently that there's a lot of resistance in Springfield, despite the fact that, for instance, the Springfield Public Health Department has done, in my opinion, a really stellar job in trying to set up a vaccine infrastructure in the neighborhoods throughout the city to make it easier for people. If they don't have cars, there's going to be a school nearby where they can get the vaccine. And yet we're severely lagging behind in our communities of color in Springfield, who have got any number of concerns about getting the vaccine. we've had a sort of a rocky rollout of getting the vaccine.
Puts it mildly, yeah.
I'll let you be more precise about it. But the bottom line
Well, the governor called it lumpy and bumpy. It was a little bit worse than that.
Well, I understand. What do we need to do now in order to get people who are resistant for historic reasons, for cultural reasons, to actually get the vaccine so we can get the numbers up so we can start that road down to whatever normal is?
So, what I would say is a couple things. First, the Springfield officials have done a fantastic job, and they really deserve that recognition. In particular, Helen Collin Harris, the Commissioner of Health and Human Services for Springfield, has done just an incredible job in very difficult circumstances. I mean, over the last year, what she's had to manage, what her team has had to manage, has been just very, very challenging, historic, once in a century situation. So they need more support, they need more resources, and I think part of the challenge here is, a couple weeks back, I hosted a conversation with Meron Rubin, who is the Israeli Consul General to New England, was formerly Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. Had him on to talk about Israel's lightning speed rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, Israel's a country with a lot to manage. I mean, we see in the news right now, their population is complicated. It's a very diverse country. That's something that Americans, I don't think, necessarily know about Israel. But they had similar issues with hesitancy, communities that were slow to take it up, maybe didn't have access the way they needed to healthcare, had skepticism of the health system. And the mindset was, rather than people coming to the vaccine, the mindset was bringing the vaccine to people. So they did clinics in the middle of the night, for overnight workers who were doing odd shifts. Taxi drivers could pull over at a sidewalk clinic in the middle of the night and get vaccinated. They did vaccinations in national parks where people were hiking. Someone was hiking through a park, and then there was an option to get vaccinated. They worked with religious leaders, to do outreach to their congregations. I mean, this is happening in America too, but there needs to just be more work on bringing the vaccine to people where they are. And I think that there needs to be more empowerment of local people. Who do people trust the most in their life? It's definitely not people they watch on TV or people whose social media they're consuming. It tends to be the people in their circles, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your local doctor, your primary care doctor, your kid's pediatrician, your rabbi, your pastor, your minister, your imam. That's who people trust, your Little League coach. So there needs to be really almost an organic grassroots approach of getting the information out and doing the education with people where they are and through the trusted sources in their communities. And then I think you're going to see a positive response. I mean, Israel now has well over 90% of its adult population vaccinated. And if America got to that level, we would conclude this pandemic.
And just refresh my memory, if I remember correctly, the population of Israel and the population of Massachusetts,
roughly, yeah, they're a little bigger, but roughly the same, yeah.
Right. So
and the geography is about the size of New Jersey.
Right. So looking at that and thinking of it that way, because when we say an entire country, it sounds daunting. But if we're saying a country that is not unlike the size of New Jersey or Massachusetts, then it really gives us cause to examine how we're doing things and whether or not we could learn from them.
Right, exactly. And my biggest, and people, this is back to how we started the conversation about our Zoom. It was a Zoom call I did with him. It's on my Facebook and on my Twitter. People can go back and look at it. But I thought the biggest takeaway from that is the mindset needs to be, you bring the vaccine to people. It's not people come get the vaccine. It's we bring it to people. And if the state has this approach of, it's at CVS, go get it at CVS. It's at the Eastfield Mall, go get it at the Eastfield Mall. Absolutely, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that jump in their car or run over there as fast as they can, and for the most part, that population has been vaccinated. But for folks who might be skeptical, for folks who might have access issues, we've got to have the mindset of bringing the vaccine to people. And I apologize for going long on this, but, I push back, especially when people in Boston make statements like, Hampden County is hesitant to be vaccinated, or that there's a lot of hesitant, that kind of absolves them of like any obligation to do the focused work that we're talking about. Yes, there are some people, maybe a lot of people, that have a ideological opposition or are very dug in their position about it. My experience being out in my 9 communities, and I have very diverse communities. I've got rural communities, urban communities, everything in between, and I'm out in my communities a lot. My experience has been that a lot of people just haven't wrapped their head around it yet, or haven't had time maybe, or don't have access. We have rural parts of Western Mass where there's no vaccine location close. We have urban parts of Springfield where it's an hour bus ride to get to the Eastfield Mall. So I don't want to let state officials off the hook for just saying, they're hesitant, we're not going to work on it. No, you bring the vaccine to people, you empower the local community, you work with trusted sources, and you keep at it to get everybody vaccinated.
Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. A lot of good information for people to hear about. And folks, thank you very much for tuning in once again to Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.